I wanna try and take in all the highs, embrace them for more than a moment's time. I want you, please don't move when I push you away. I know I contradict myself some days, but will you ride the lows with me?
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I am your host, Kristin Sunanta Walker. Our goal is to help discussions about mental health be a regular part of your daily life, no different than discussions about physical health. Mental illness can be a topic of discussion under the umbrella of mental health, along with so many other topics. This show is the original program on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com. Our network of shows are played in over 180 countries and cover more topics under that umbrella than you can possibly imagine. We were talking about mental health long before it became cool and popular to talk about, and thank goodness it has become so popular. We have incredible guests, advocates, patients, experts, people. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy our intro music, a song named Lows, written by Aubrey Toon. You can find her music at www.aubreytoone.com.
That night when I started praying, I cried, will you ride the lows with me? Will you ride the lows with me? When I'm down, my vision gets blurry.
Sean Perry, thank you so much for coming on Mental Health News Radio.
Kristin, thank you for having me.
Of course. So tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am a father of 5. I've been with my wife for about 21 years. We've been married for about 17. We currently live in the state of Vermont, and I was a chef I worked in the restaurant industry for about 20 years and realized that I just had a passion to help people. And being in the restaurant industry just wasn't going to fulfill that passion, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So at the age of 35, I'd been coaching youth sports for years, off and on. So at the age of 35, I said, look, I'm never going to own a restaurant. So I'm either going to put up or shut up. And I told my wife I'm quitting my job as a chef. And she looked at me like I was crazy. And I just went with it. And here I am years later, running a co-founder of a nonprofit, president and executive director as well. And the rest is just history.
Fantastic. And the nonprofit's called We R H.O.P.E.
Yes.
Did you know anything about running a nonprofit or how to start one or anything like that when you said, I'm doing something different?
I did not. So
you had a climb then, didn't you?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I worked for a nonprofit when I started out in a residential field, and I didn't really know much about the ins and outs at all. But I've never been shy to take up a challenge, and I sat down with my business partner and I read everything that I could possibly read. And I called the right people. They helped to create the nonprofit, like all the paperwork. And we went from there. And I knew how to run a business because I'd been a chef. And so I'd run kitchens and run the restaurants. And so I knew that aspect of it. But the nonprofit piece was definitely new to me.
Well, tell us about We R H.O.P.E.
Yeah, so We R H.O.P.E. Is a nonprofit that supports children in public schools 5 days a week, utilizing a life coaching and cognitive behavioral coaching model. It's very unique. And so we support kids 5 days a week for a half an hour every day. And the purpose of our organization is to not only break the stigma surrounding mental illness by normalizing support, but to really fill in the gaps within the mental health system that are just so widely opened, right? One of the things as a parent myself, um, that I would always struggle with was, what if that's my child, right? What if it's my child? Well, I'm a busy person. My wife is a busy person. So how do we get our child to therapy? How do we get our child to seek supports? And so one of the things we realized when creating this model was, where are kids all day? They're in school. So we created our model to be able to actually go into schools and fill in the gaps in the school system, because that's where we were going to be able to um, meet all of our clients, and more importantly, release the pressure from the parents feeling like, for one, they didn't have the resources to bring their child to get support, um, or they just don't have the time in the day. I remember one of my kiddos, one of my own children, needed support, and I had to bring them on a Sunday morning
Mm.
to see their therapist, which was just
Yeah.
hard,
Yeah.
really, really hard. And it was 45 minutes away. Um, and so, we did that for a few months, but it wasn't feasible. So and more importantly, I think, one of the things we also do that's extremely unique is we were using telecoaching long before the pandemic and before it became a thing. So our model was really built on telecoaching as well, so that we can
That's
support anybody,
fantastic.
anywhere, at any time.
Yeah. So you didn't see that dip that a lot of people did in terms of work.
No, we didn't have a dip at all. That
That's
was
great.
and what I mean by that was, so we were, when COVID hit, we were, in school, boots on the ground. Our coaches were doing work every day, and then they said they were closing schools, and so local mental health agencies were panicking, like, well, how are we going to reach these kids? How are we going to do this? And I sent a mass email out to all of our schools and said, We R H.O.P.E is status quo. We already have a system set up to meet the kids virtually. I mean, we were ready to go. So our organization started in the state of New Hampshire, and our very first client was actually in Georgia virtually.
That's amazing. I mean, I know when we talked before, I thought, wow, they must be really struggling. And then when you said, nope, we're ready, I thought, wow, that is,
Yeah.
you did things right without even, realizing that that's what you were doing.
Well, it was interesting, we our whole, I guess, thought process is, we want to change the mental health care system. And one of the biggest things that's out there is access, access, access. So when you build your organization on creating that access, you're already making that change. And so I think that's what we did right, was that the foundation was at creating access and opportunities for those that do not have access to support.
Now, when you say access, because I know, a lot of people don't understand, the day in the life of how someone would utilize your services. So can you give an example of that? Because access to a lot of people is, even people I know that are in the mental health field, when they say, they need counseling for themselves, oftentimes they've been like, look, I'm in the field and I can't seem to get counseling.
Right, right. Well, so first, I just want to put this out there so that everybody understands that we are not counselors, we're not therapists. We are all certified life coaches that utilize a cognitive behavioral technique. So we use all CBT skills in our
Great.
coaching model. And so, because we're coaches, when I say access, it means that I can see you 3 times a day if you need to, because we're not regulated the way therapists are.
Yeah.
Um,
Important differentiation there. Yeah.
Exactly. I can see you 7 days a week. I mean, and that's why our model is built on 5 days a week for kids, because it allows them to have consistency in support. So when I say access, I mean, think about the best possible way that you would want someone to support you. We've created that access. That is exactly who we are. You can call us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You'll get someone on the phone and they will be there to support you. It's not a
Mhm.
crisis line. It is this is your coach line. Does that make sense? Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
and more importantly, so we've had kids. I've worked with a young man in Mexico. I've worked with kids in the US that then flew to London. And when I say they had, flew to Europe, when I say they had access, the services don't stop. You have virtual access to your coach at any time. Text support, you name it. we are there. So when we're working with the student, we also work with the parents who choose to work with us. And I also want to point that out, right? So some parents say they want their kids to get help, but they don't want to do any work with the child, and it's never a one-way street.
Right.
The family's got to get involved in this also. And so when I say access, I mean we meet with parents. We help coach parents so that they learn how to work with a child that's struggling with anxiety or depression or OCD. We help guide the entire family unit so that everybody walks out feeling supported. That's the access, the level of access that we create at We R H.O.P.E.
That's fantastic. How has I mean, I would imagine it's been amazing, the support that you've received, but talk a little bit about, about like from the beginnings, and did you have people saying, "What are you doing?" And, how you moved past that?
Yeah. So, we never had anybody say that what we were doing was a stupid idea. Never. Everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's amazing." But we didn't have people
Good.
yeah, but we never had anybody believing in us that said, "Hey, by the way, I've got an extra, 10 grand to support your to support your project."
Right.
I'm going to be
Yeah.
honest. I mean, we've had some people donate, and it's interesting. I looked the other day on our on Facebook on our donation page, and we've had, we've been up and going for um, almost 4 years, and we've had we've raised about $3,000 on Facebook.
Okay.
That's pretty decent. I mean, it's
Yeah.
pretty decent for an organization that is small. We do have a private organization up our way that has donated uh, about $25,000 last year, which put me into tears because I wasn't expecting it at all.
That's nice.
And so that was extremely supportive, and that was able to help so many children. I can't even explain how many kids that was able to help, because at that point we did any donation money, we then use it at cost, and we don't pay ourselves anything. It just goes directly to the support and care of the child. And if I'm the one actually offering the support, then the money just stays in the account. If I have to pay a coach to do it, then we just pay the coach their hour, and the money doesn't come back into the account. So we've created a system where it's really all for the people. So when people do actually donate to us, you can track where the resources go, and they're always going directly to the client.
That's awesome. So how was that, in terms of a family discussion? Hey, I'm going to go from regular paid gigs to this.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because for the first when we got our very first contract, I'll never forget, our very first contract was $3,500 a month, which needed to be split between myself and my business partner at 50-50. Because when we first started, we were an LLC. We weren't a nonprofit. We just wanted to get the business name up and going.
Right.
And as you can imagine, I had 2 cars. I think I had a motorcycle payment. I had, 5 kids, or I have 5 kids, and it just, I was broke. Everything was going
Yeah.
on the credit cards. But I always knew that we were doing God's work, right? That we were doing the work that, and not to be corny, right? That humanity needed right now.
Right.
We are in an all-out mental health crisis / pandemic around the world. And we are seeing suicide rates and mental health rates just skyrocketing throughout this country in particularly. And then we can go state to state to look at numbers there. But when you're doing something that's right, you know that you're on the right path. And so I didn't really worry about money. The conversation was, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And it is fine. Everything kind of worked
Thankfully,
itself
yeah.
out, thankfully.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have quit, quite honestly, even if it wasn't working out. I think I would have made it work. If I had to, if we had to not hire people so that I had to do the work myself to keep funds in house, and we would have done that. But we just got so big that we couldn't do the work ourselves anymore.
Right. Yeah, it's quite an undertaking. And what I always see with people that, do things like you've done is if you sat down sometimes and looked at it all on paper, maybe a more normal quote unquote organization or advisor would go, this is ridiculous. You can't keep doing this. This isn't, but somehow it always works.
Well, I will say this, we're pretty blessed in the sense that um, we're contracted through the school, right?
Yep.
And so we're contracted from September through the schools. We're contracted from September to August. I mean, to June. And so when I go into contract negotiation with the school, first and foremost, the school typically doesn't pay for it out of their budget. They pay for it through Title I and Title IV funds. So anyone that's actually listening to the show that's thinking about bringing this to their school, understand that you could put it into your budget if you so choose, and your school district has the resources, but you can use Title I funds and or Title IV funds because we are a preventative care service. And so that's where we fall into that realm for funding. But when we go into contract negotiations and I write the contract for the schools, because the schools are a year ahead on their budget, I always know what's coming up the next year and whether we need to hire more staff or we need to downgrade or whatever the case may be. So I always know a year in advance what our resources are going to be. So we're pretty blessed in that regard for it not to be so last minute of whether we have a contract or not. For instance, actually, we signed a new school district this year in 3 schools. And midway through the year, I just signed another contract with them. I added to their contract. They wanted another 6 hours and a whole new coach to go into one of the schools that were already in for 3 hours. So we're growing constantly. And some bigger things are happening from there as well.
Did you know anything about getting into school systems?
Um, I didn't. I did not. But I knew from a business standpoint that we had a product that they could not deny.
Right.
And so that was my push. And that is from a business standpoint, that's my sell. We have kids epically struggling and you guys are spending money because you don't understand them and you're sending them out of district because of their quote unquote behaviors, when 9 times out of 10 their behaviors is related to the anxieties and the stressors that they're feeling from home. And you're spending $90,000 to $120,000 to ship them off to another school district when we can keep them within your district and give them the support that they need. Now, those are the more higher profile cases, if you will, of kids that are really struggling. But every day, there are kids that are sitting in the back of the class, struggling just to be there. And no one's talking to them or giving them the support that they need. And those are the kids that end up sitting at the end of a bar every day in their 20s and utilizing drugs and alcohol and all these other things. And so if we can look at the effects of mental illness in the school at a younger age, we can create change in our future systems for our children.
Are there any tools that you use online to support the work that you're doing, meaning assessments and so on, what an EHR, an electronic health record system, is for a counseling office? I know you don't need all of that, obviously, but do you have things like that
Yeah,
you?
that's a great question. So one of the things that we use, the documentation system that we use is Best Notes. I'll give them a little plug because they're just a phenomenal company that allows for our notes and our documentation. But we utilize the GAD-7 test at the beginning, middle, and end of all services. And with some of our kids, we use the what is it? The ACEs study.
Right.
But we have to be careful with the ACEs study just because of there's a couple questions that are a little too sensitive.
Right.
So we use it for our older kids with permission from the parents. We won't use it with our younger kids. We leave that up to a physician.
That's the big thing I've seen. I work with a lot of technology companies, software companies, and trying to understand how school districts can use software, but not needing it to be a full-blown EHR and having to be careful because of HIPAA compliance and things like
Absolutely.
that. So
Absolutely.
yeah, there's an interesting line there, because there are so many incredible assessments available, but finding them all in one place that's affordable,
Well, yeah,
you know.
that's the great thing about Best Notes is that they actually stack a bunch of different assessments in there, and you can utilize whichever ones that you want. So it becomes, it's
Great.
part of our system. And so we decided to use the GAD-7 because we really do focus on anxiety, and by giving that assessment at the beginning of service, the middle of service, and at the end of service, we're really able to track the data of where they started and then where they end.
Fantastic. Do the schools ever request that information?
We send it out regardless if they request it.
Okay.
So one of the things that we do, and I think we do really well, is we communicate regularly with our schools. So we are not an organization that comes in, has an office at the school, sees our kids and leaves. We are integrated within that community. And what I mean by integration is we even take the resources that they pay us, and we give it back to the school by buying Thanksgiving meals, books, clothes, whatever families in need. We end up having to, or not having to, but we end up actually paying to support those families that are in need, because again, we want to make sure that these families know that they have support in a way that they've
Right.
never had support before. And so every Friday, all of our coaches send out a report, a weekly report on what goals the child is working on, where they've been, how they're doing on those goals, and what the upcoming goals are. And it goes to the parents, it goes to the principal, and it goes to our the school counselor or our lead at the school, and then also the teachers. So everyone is on the same page.
Mm. That's amazing. I mean, truly, that's amazing. Because I know when I did work with a therapy dog and I would go into schools, I was going into the behavioral health classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was a separate classroom for the quote unquote bad kids.
Right.
And we were doing work in there, but I never knew whether those were, funded by the school or if they worked with counseling organizations. I found out later, a lot of times it was a counseling organization that contracted with the school
Right.
to provide those services. But, but it wasn't like what you're talking about. I like the idea of the coaching because I'm not dissing in any way those classrooms. I think they're phenomenal. However, there was stigma associated with it, which there shouldn't be, but there was.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids that went to those classrooms were, oftentimes embarrassed.
Well, let's call it what it is. You're taking kids in a sense, out of general population, you're isolating them into a classroom and saying you have an issue.
Right.
That's going to naturally come with a stigma. And
Right.
everyone in that school knows the kids that go to that class.
Yeah.
And it's sad because there's not open discussion about what that class should really be designed for. And that is to get those kids out of that space back into quote unquote general population to be able to be with their classmates. And in some cases, what I was talking about earlier, where we're sending kids outside of their own district, you've got, let's call it student A that lives next to student B, but student A, who's his or her neighbor, is then shipped to another school district or to a quote unquote alternative school because their behaviors are, they can't be within the school because they don't follow the guidelines and the rules. But my question is why can't we create space within that school? There's a common theme of we're not set up for that. Well, I thought you were set up to support children.
Right.
And so then my question is, why can't we be set up for that? And so We R H.O.P.E is actually working with a specific school district now to be able to help create a program within the school to then save those resources and keep those funds within the district, and allow for those students to have, we've created a specific classroom where each student has their own coach or has a group of coaches within there, and they're there with them all day. And so they're working on those skills consistently and have that support. Because I've worked in residential where, these kids, they can't go to regular school. They're sent off to live at a residential facility. They're violent offenders, whatever the case may be. But one of the things that they don't often talk about is these kids were physically, sexually, and emotionally abused. And now we're stigmatizing them for what was done to them.
Right.
I
So
mean,
true.
like, how is that
How
fair?
is that helpful? Yeah, exactly. So when you say working with the student all day, give me kind of a day in the life of what that looks like.
Yeah, so that would be for our individual classroom, which we're working on creating with the school district.
Okay.
But when we're in the school, so for instance, we have a coach that arrives at 8:30 in the morning. At 8:30, they see their student. They see their first student, but they're there from 8:30 to 2:30, and they see student after student after student. So that 6-hour coach sees 12 students every single day.
And they're arriving at a school and they're going to an office that's set up for them. Is that how
Correct.
that works?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They go to a space that's set up for them, and they go pull kids from class, or kids come depending on their age. They'll come by themselves, and they're seeing students from the time they get there to the time they leave. And what's great is, sometimes, a student's not there, so they have an open slot. Another student, if they're struggling, they can come for the day. We get called down to the office to go support another student that we're already working with. And it's just this cycle of being a constant level of support within the school for 6 hours every day.
It would be fascinating if the service that you provide was made available and was almost, mandatory for every single student. Can you imagine the things that you could
Well, it's interesting
unearth?
it's interesting that you say that, because I often get asked when I go in, so Sean, who is the perfect client? They want to know, like, what kinds of kids are we looking for our program? And I say, well, honestly,
Every
every
kid.
student that's in your school
Yeah.
can utilize our support. But what they're currently looking for are kids that are struggling, whether
Right.
academically, socially, emotionally, and those are the students that we get. But like I said to them, we can support every student that's in your school. And I think, to your point, where wouldn't this be great if it was mandatory? Well, what we would like to see is that every school across this country has a We R H.O.P.E in it.
I'd love to see that, but also see it that every kid goes,
Yeah.
because there's so many ways that things, can fall through the
Well,
cracks. And imagine the supportive emotional well-being of mental health in general to support every single student, not because it's lacking from a teacher, nothing like that, just this is how important it is. It's so important that we're here to provide this service to everyone.
absolutely. I couldn't agree more. But I think one of the things that we even struggle with now, even with kids that really do need the support, is we're battling the teachers academically. Well, they're missing a half hour of my math class, or they're
Right.
missing a half hour of English class. And I say that, and we often have to sit down and have the real talk and the real conversation of, well, they haven't done anything in your class for the last 6 months.
Right,
So
exactly.
because they're struggling. So don't you think that getting them the support that they need will actually help them to come to your class and be in a space to learn?
Right.
And what teachers are actually finding is that when they give in to what we're proposing, that's exactly what's happening. That kids are in a much better space, socially, emotionally, and even physically, to be able to learn. Their brain is online. They're not thinking about the stressors from the day, and they're utilizing their coping skills to be able to manage their day. And we are starting to find that the more that we go.
Yeah, and I hope. I know with different administrations that come in the United States, you have different funding about mental health. So I'm hoping that a change this year. We won't get into the back and forth of politics.
Right.
However, it will be nice, I think, that this will happen. That we go from an administration that just was not interested at all to one that is, and see things like this, so that reduces stigma. If you say this is here for everybody and everybody must go to this, there's no more stigma about it. It's just, this is just what it is. And it's a healthy, well, we want to support you in this manner, just like we would if you're walking around with a broken leg, or you have some
Absolutely.
a speech impediment or whatever.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. I think one of the things I'm already hearing kind of, in the background at some of the schools that we're at is that they are expected to see more federal funds to come in this year. And so they are excited about that. So that's some of the things that's already been, I guess, kind of announced or discussed
Good.
regarding the funds.
Good,
But
because I know walking into there was just a lot of change with our current administration and a
right.
lot of concern, and we've seen that be a problem. So that's really good to hear.
Yeah. And, we are, as we continue to grow too, I think, one of the great things that we have the ability to do because we are the creators of it. We're able to, the more schools that we get, we're actually able to reduce the cost because we've got another school, if that makes sense.
Mm,
So the more schools that sign on with us, so currently, our rate is $70 an hour, which is extremely cheap.
right.
But the more schools that we get, we can reduce the rate more and more, um, to a point of, I think one of our schools this year, because of COVID, what we did was, we charged them, I think it was $50 an hour, and I think another school 45. So we want to make it super affordable. So
Right.
so that schools are almost, they have no way to say no. Right? Like, why
Yeah,
would you say
exactly.
no? Why would you say no
Exactly.
to this level of support? And so that's, our hope is that with the more schools that we get, that we can hold a standard rate, drop that rate by, X amount of dollars and say, this is going to be the rate for everybody, because we've got so many schools now that the resources don't really matter at this point. This is what, we're going to stay afloat. And this is great.
Oh, that's so fantastic. That's so fantastic. So, tell me this: what inspired you to want to get into this particular field? Because it's not where someone goes if they say, "I'm going to be a gazillionaire,"
Right.
or a
Right, right,
celebrity.
right. So when I was young, I'd wanted to be a psychologist. I had gotten in some trouble in school. That's a whole nother story at a young age, and I got sent to this guy, Mr. Bosniak, and he had this pipe in his mouth, and he wore this hat, and he walked around the school smoking his pipe. You could smell when he was in the school, and I just liked how he talked with me, and I appreciated it. And so I said that I wanted to go to school. When I got into high school, I said I want to be a psychologist, and that just didn't work out. I became a dad at 19, and I started coaching youth football right out of high school. I think I was 18, and I ended up being the head coach my first year because the other head coach had something that happened with work, and I needed to take over. And so I coached youth football in Middletown, Connecticut for the next 3 years and did really, really well. Um, I got like coach of the year or something like that a couple times, um, and I just loved seeing kids that struggled not struggle anymore. And so when I moved up to Vermont and New Hampshire, I coached my daughter's basketball team for years. And then I coached youth football. Then I coached high school football. And I just was drawn to seeing kids do well. Um, I, I'd made a lot of mistakes in my life, early on. And I knew that a lot of them were also related to my anxieties that I struggled with. And I didn't want kids to
Right.
struggle with the anxieties that I had. And if I had any power in me to prevent that I would do that. And so that's really what it was about. I'd left my job as a chef, and I went and worked as a residential counselor and worked my way up at that facility. And then ran that facility. Then I went and ran another facility, and I wanted to find a way where all kids were created equally. I think that was the biggest push. Was the one facility that we worked at, it cost $90,000 for children to go there. And that
Wow.
was just absurd to me. Absolutely
Wow.
absurd. I mean, look, if you have the money, then great. That's fine. I won't talk anything bad in that regard. But there's so many other children that don't have that. The vast majority of families don't have those
Don't have that.
resources
Exactly.
to help their child. And I saw the work that was being done there, which was phenomenal work, which was just great work. But the thing that kept being on my mind was, what about everybody else? Right? What about all these other kids across this country that don't have those resources? Where do they go? Well,
Right.
they get 504 plans, they get IEPs, they go to alternative school, you name it, but they don't get support. And so, yeah, as far as the money for me, I don't think it ever crossed my mind. We do okay financially. But it's more about how can we make sure that all the other people are doing okay emotionally.
Your compass runs, points.
I'm a different breed.
Yeah, it does. It takes a different thing. I mean, it really, really does. And a lot of people don't really understand what does it really mean to be someone who is of service to others. And that is what you live, eat, breathe, and sleep, and what you make every single day.
Absolutely. And I think, the thought of selflessness, right? Of just being selfless.
Right.
I have a strong faith. I always have. And I believe that if we do service for others, that it will come back on us, by what we are owed in life, right? If I do good to you, you'll do good to me. And I think there's so much bad going out there, and people always trying to scam and get over on somebody else, and even utilize organizations like this to line their pockets.
Right.
But why? When you have the ability to help so many people. And also, I think, quite honestly, it's in my DNA. My grandmother, my father's mother, she had 9 children. And she would always have a house full of other kids and foster kids and people that were just there in the house, and she was helping. I've got a brother who runs schools, and he's created schools, and uncles, the police officers, and everybody in my family is always helped somebody else.
Right.
I think it's just in my DNA to give back what little I have so that someone else could have more than me.
That's amazing. Well, on that amazing note, because we need more people like you that do this work, can you tell our listeners where they can find out more about your organization?
Absolutely. So you can go to www.werhope.org. That's wearhope.org. That's www.werhope.org. Or you can email me at Sean, SEAN, at wearhope.org. That's Sean at wearhope.org. Or feel free to give me a call at 802-440-1428. Again, that's 802-440-1428. And I'm happy to answer any questions anytime. We're getting ready to do a 3-week youth Upper Valley. It's called the Upper Valley Youth Wellness Retreat. We are charging $25 a day. We are trying to make these things so affordable to children and families throughout, the areas that we work currently.
It's amazing. I'm happy to know you, and I'm certainly happy that you decided to come on the show.
Well, thank you so much. It's really an honor to be on the show. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mental Health News Radio. Hi, listeners. I'll make it quick. These are some really cool places that give discounts and other cool things for listeners of Mental Health News Radio Network. If you want to get amazing help with healing from narcissistic abuse, go to healfromanarcissist.com. If you want CBD products that are the best of the best, I use them myself, go to Proze, PROZE.com, and use the code mentalhealth20, mentalhealth20. If you want to get daily perk ups that help retrain your brain to think more positively, go to perkupdaily.com. And also, just because this one's fun, snarkycandles.com. I guarantee you'll love them. Snarky with a Y, SNARKY candles.com. And don't forget, if you want to hear all the shows on the network about first responders, you can go to firstrespondernmentalhealthnetwork.com, and all of our shows that focus on narcissistic abuse, narcissisticabusehealingnetwork.com. Thanks for listening, and back to the show.
But will you ride the low, low lows with me? Will you ride the lows with me?
One thing you can always count on at Mental Health News Radio Network and my show is that there will always be dogs around. Why? They are natural healers, excellent for your mental health. The original therapy dog Miles has something to say in just a moment. For now, please check out all of our amazing shows at mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com and all your favorite podcast apps. Until next time, I'm Kristin Sananta Walker, and thank you for listening.
And I can ride the lows with me. I can ride the lows with me. Till my vision clears up perfectly. I can ride the lows with me.
Good boy.